welcome to the final session of Unit 4. And in this session, we'll be looking at selecting instructional materials. My name is Patrick Ej. Now, at the end of this session, you should be able to understand and apply the criteria for selecting instructional materials for teaching physics. Now, what are the criteria for selecting instructional material? So we have seen the different types of instructional materials that can be used in the teaching and learning of physics in order to maximize students' learning. And we must understand that these materials will have no value in the learning process if they cannot be seen or heard. So if you are using a visual aid and students cannot see this, or you are using an audio media and learners cannot hear, or you are using an audio visual and students can neither hear nor see, then you realize that this media or material, although has been taken to the classroom, however, it will be of no relevance to the teaching and learning, since students cannot see and hear what exactly you want to present to them. So recordings of sound and speech should be tested for correct volume and quality in the actual environment in which they will be used. And this is one thing you as a teacher, you should always do. Anytime you want to use an audio media, anytime you want to use an audio visual media, try as much as possible to test whether the sound is okay. Is the sound clear? Can everybody in the classroom hear, no matter the position or place he or she may find himself or herself? All these preliminary testings should be done before the actual day or the actual learning takes place. And visual aids must be visible to the entire class. So when you are using visual aids, ensure that everybody can see from it. And all letterings and illustrations must be large enough to be seen easily by the students farthest from the material color. And when used, should provide clear contrast and easily be visible. So when you want to use a visual aid and you find out your class size is very large, let's assume you have a class of about 200 students, and you are using, let's say, a 3 feet by 4 feet visual material. You realize that this material could only be seen by students who are in front. Those at the far end are going to find difficulty seeing the content of that material. And so the effectiveness of aids and the ease of their preparation can be increased by initially planning them in rough draft form. So planning is very essential anytime you want to use any instructional media in your teaching. And revisions and alterations are easier to make at that time rather than after their completion. So mind you that when you plan, you are able to revise. If there are alterations that you want to make, you are able to do them before the actual usage of the material. And the rough draft should be carefully checked for technical accuracy, proper terminology, grammar, spelling, basic balance, clarity, as well as simplicity. So ensure that every word that is written on the chart is well spelled. There are no grammatical errors. All these things should be avoided. Try as much as you can to prevent these things before using the device or media you may want to use in your teaching and learning process. And instructional aids should also be reviewed to determine whether their use is feasible in the training environment and whether they are appropriate for the students. So if you are going to use an instructional aid, if it is video you want to use, If it is an audio that you want to use, find out, is it appropriate to the level of the learners? All these things must be determined before you finally decide to use that material in the teaching and learning process. So, below are the guidelines for choosing an instructional material for effective teaching and learning. So, in order for effective teaching of physics to occur, then you must follow, or you must ensure that your instructional aid meets the following criteria. And the criteria that your instructional aid must meet include relevance, appropriateness, availability, quality, cost, the learners, as well as approach of producers. Now let's look at these criteria in detail. So relevance. When we say something is relevant to a situation, then it means that it is relevant to both the objectives and the target learners for whom the materials are to be used. So, if it is relevant, then it should be able to help you achieve the stated learning objectives. It should be able to suit the level of the learners. The learners should be the target of the material that you want to use. And this must take into account the age of the learners, their maturation level, their interest, what they need, their ability, aspirations, as well as their attitudes. All these must be taken into account whenever we are finding out whether an instructional material is relevant for usage in teaching a particular physics concept. And we must also find out whether the resources make for easy and meaningful teaching and learning. That is when it comes to relevance. In addition, let us look at the appropriateness of an instructional material. And the resources that we use should suit the local community of the learners or the content under discourse. Sometimes there are some materials that you use, and these materials can even be located in the physical environment of the learner. We must try as much as possible to use such materials because these materials are likely to arouse the interest of the learners. Learners may have had an experience with such materials, and so when they are about to use them again, they feel happy and they find it interesting to use such material. Let's look at availability. And the resources that you as a teacher you intend to use must be available and accessible to you and the learners. Don't go for any material that you find it difficulty having access to. A material that you find difficulty having access to may not be very okay for you to use because maybe on the day that you may want to use it, you are not going to get access and it may hinder whatever thing that you may want to present to your learners. And sometimes the best materials may not be available. Hence, the need to be able to improvise. So, as a teacher, when you find out that there is a material that you want to use but it is not available and you can improvise, you just have to improvise the material and use it in the teaching learning process. Quality. And when we talk of quality, we look at the physical features of the resource or the material. And this includes the durability of the material, the size, clarity, usefulness, drawings, paintings, weight, as well as ease of storage. Now, assuming you want to carry a material to a class, and this material, if you don't get a track, you cannot carry it. You realize that this is going to be very difficult to use such a material because when you are done, how are you even going to store it? The material must be of appropriate size that students can easily have access to. And quality resources we know will last more. So that is for quality. Now let's look at cost. And the resources should be economical. And when we are saying economical, we are not saying it should be cheap. Yes, cheap is good, but it should be cheap, but quality resources are preferable. And so, for instance, there is a lesson that you may want your learners to meet a resource person. You realize that it will be more cost effective to invite a resource person to your school rather than carrying all your students to the resource person. So always we must check for this, the cost effectiveness of the material or the resource that we want to use in the teaching learning process in order to enhance students' learning and their understanding of physics concepts. So cost has implication for time, it has implication for storage as well as energy. And the learner, the learner, we must understand that every child is unique due to so many factors such as socioeconomic status of parents, intelligence, interest, needs, as well as aspirations. And you, as a teacher, must select a resource material that will take care of the diverse students and needs of the learners for a meaningful interaction. So you know that you have different students in your classroom. And in most physics classrooms, you are going to find more males than females. And so your instructional materials that you select, you should also consider the kind of learners you are going to present to. You must understand the various backgrounds of the learners. You realize that sometimes you may select a particular material, and this material, students from the rich homes may have had several access to such a material, but those from the poor backgrounds may not have had access. And so you, as a teacher, must know how to use such a material so that at the end of the day, it can maximize student learning and help them to understand the various concepts that you want to present to your learners. So materials which will encourage interactivity and participation are the best to be selected. So anytime you are selecting a material as a teacher, you must select those that will ensure active participation of your learners. Materials that will bring some kind of interactiveness in your classroom, not a material that will let students be passive in the classroom. You know, these things does not help in the teaching learning process. And resources must also make learning interesting to the learners and should be varied, and we must combine such resources. So the resources that we use, in as much as they are interactive, they must also be interesting to the learners. We must vary them so that at the end of the day we can have active and full participation of all learners in the classroom. Now, students, in this session, we look at the criteria for selecting instructional materials for teaching physics. And as we bring the session to an end, state and explain 5 criteria for the selection and effective use of resources for physics teaching.